Boy, so I saw this on Twitter a while ago, 1.4 million views, and holy balls, this is just watch.
And unlike many countries in the West, including Britain,
Okay, I have to walk a tightrope here with extreme grace because all of you are thinking the exact same thing I am. If you're going to speak, especially on certain subjects, and especially if you're going to BS people by lying through your teeth, you need to have stage presence. Your voice needs to have a commanding quality of authority, much like mine has, for example. A voice that can help you sell. This is not that. And by the way, have you noticed how many children are used as political pawns these days? Especially along environmental lines, shall we say. I wonder why that is. I don't actually, so you don't criticize them because you would be lambasted as cruel. I don't care, kids don't know anything about the world, nor do they have any power to make any change, they're just useful idiots. The only thing separating them from any other gullible activist is the age.
Africa is not saddled with debt.
From Business Insider, about a year ago, discussions about the debt-to-GDP ratio of African countries is especially important at a point, considering the fact that the public debt stock across the continent have been climbing to levels never before seen in the history of modernity. A recent report by the World Bank showed that more than half of the world's low-income countries, most of which are in Africa, geez, I wonder why, are either currently grappling with debt distress or at risk of doing so. This is according to a blog post that was recently published on the World Bank's website. Also, Standard Bank Group recently red-flagged Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, Zambia, and Angola as African countries that could soon experience serious debt risks. Hell, Ghana has been through 16 IMF programs since gaining independence in 1957. So it's not exactly very independent then, is it? In fact, check this out. Nkurama saw independent Ghana as a spearhead for the liberation of the rest of Africa from colonial rule and the establishment of a socialist African unity under his leadership. After the founding of a republic in 1960, the state became identified with a single political party, the CPP, with Nkurama as life president of both, taking ever more power for himself. On the Pan-African front, Nkurama's messianism was increasingly challenged by other leaders of an ever-growing number of independent states. By 1966, his dream of African socialism was foundering under haphazard and corrupt administration, massive foreign debts, and declining living standards. Jeez, who couldn't see that one coming from a friggin' mile off?
The British debt is 87% of the British GDP, while the African debt is only 9% of their GDP. All but 2 countries in Africa could pay off their debt within 1 year.
And yet they never do. I wonder why that is. I bet the answer wasn't written in that speech there, was it, boy?
So the potential is already there.
Potential for what? Kid, life is not a Marvel movie, and Wakanda isn't real. Though he does sound more erudite than Kamala Harris, doesn't he? Let that sink in. A prepubescent child is more eloquent than the Vice President of the United States. I wonder what's the difference between those two.
And the growth is already beginning.
That's birth rates, not economic.
Even now, Africa is the continent in the world with the fastest economic growth.
Okay, stop. That is the dumbest lie of omission I've ever heard. Saying Africa has the fastest economic growth is like saying someone who's never lifted weights before in their whole life has made more progress in a year than a seasoned lifter. Yeah, because there was nothing there to begin with. You're in a phase where damn near anything you do is a system shock that will spur the growth. Those countries will never ever be economic powerhouses ever, and everyone knows this.
The GDP per capita of sub-Saharan Africa is expected to rise by 800% from 2020 to 2050.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that is driven by Chinese investment. Probably well over 80%, I would guess.
Anyone who doubts that Africa can make quick economic progress like this
has surpassed puberty and isn't a leftist, or a pawn of leftism.
Should look at the economic history of the US. In 1977...
Wait, stop. You're going to compare the African continent to America. You don't think there might be a fair few differences in, say, government structure, infrastructure, demographics, intelligence, currency? And in 1977, under Jimmy Carter, one of the worst performing US presidents of that century. I mean, my good lord, this was really bad, but oof, this is like taking a nosedive.
The US economy was the same size as the African economy is today.
Comparing an entire continent to one country almost 50 years later, lad, that is not the boast you think it is. nor is the comparison remotely appropriate. Holy Moses. Like, imagine saying, hey, look at this continent which has the same economic size as this country almost half a century ago, when it was led by a miserable president laden with economic problems that led to the election of the biggest blowout in US history at the time, Ronald Reagan, who crushed Jimmy Carter with a jaw-dropping 489 electoral vote win. That is not even a landslide, that's a funeral. In fact, let me read this from Britannica about the election. The general election campaign between Carter and Reagan seemed more an exercise in shadowboxing than a serious discussion of the issues that concern the voters. Double-digit inflation, rising unemployment, the crisis in Iran, the Cold War with the Soviet Union, Carter's unpopular stances on the need for energy conservation, and doubts about his competence and that of the people around him. Reagan stressed the communist threat abroad and the dire effects that big government was having on the country's economy, but he never clearly spelled out his remedies beyond calling for a massive cut in income taxes. Meanwhile, Carter spent most of the campaign attempting to paint his opponent as an extremist who would divide the nation and tend to shoot from the hip in international relations. My good God, talk about history not repeating itself, but it certainly does rhyme. Holy hell.
And since then, the American economy has grown by a massive $18.419 trillion.
Africa is not America, kid. I hope someday soon you will look upon this day and wisen up and rid yourself of the adults who made you look this incredibly delusional, because this is a form of child cruelty in my eyes.
And with Africa having more natural resources than the US.
Yes, Africa has always had those natural resources, and yet it never made them wealthy. That's a puzzler, that one it is.
Its progress in the next 40 years could be even more spectacular.
Especially when China is the one that is going to take all of those resources because they're essentially colonizing the place. And the same problems of corruption will plague the place and never dissipate. If only there was some way to solve this tricky dilemma. It's subtle as a brick.
So if you are someone here today...
Oh wait, it's a TED Talk? No wonder it's so insanely delusional. How did I only see that now?
Thinks South Africa will never catch up with the rest of the world.
Kid, I'm South African. I can confirm that to be true. Why do you think Mr. Beast went to Africa to install all those wells to begin with? Hell, why do you think after they were installed, what they spoke about is the maintenance of those wells? Could it possibly be because the people who could not build the wells to begin with would obviously not be able to maintain them, and they would very likely be broken and unusable within a couple of years? It's a pretty apt allegory for colonialism and independence movements now, isn't it?
I want to say that you will be proved wrong.
You can say whatever you want to, little man. I will bet my life you'll be incorrect.
With its mammoth population.
Yeah, a massive population is only useful if the people themselves are productive and useful, you know. Secondly, did he just say mammoth population? Friggin' hell, I know Africa's old, but it's not that old.
Massive potential. And amazing stores of resources.
That never made them wealthy ever, despite them always being there.
Within your lifetime, Africa will become an economic superpower. Thank you.
Never in a million years. My good God, the naivety. Wait, this came from Business Insider? Get the fuck out. The bit that I read about the debt was from Business Insider. Holy shit, that is outstanding. I can't end on a funnier note than that. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.